Hello, this is Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com, and I think it's time that we get into another book of the Bible to study. Now, we've studied several books already in the New Testament, so let's go ahead and do an Old Testament book. And I think since we have already previously gone through the book of Revelation in the New Testament, I think it would only be appropriate and fitting that the first Old Testament book that we studied together be the book of Daniel. If you followed along last year where I went through the whole book of Revelation, we referenced Daniel quite a bit because the book of Daniel in the Old Testament is one of the keys to understanding the book of Revelation. So let's get into the book of Daniel because it's got prophecies that are entirely relevant for today. But the book of Daniel doesn't just have prophecies, it also has true Bible stories. The book of Daniel is actually a fantastic book to go to read some of the really awesome true Bible stories to children. So let's go ahead and turn to the book of Daniel. And clearly, we're going to want to start in Daniel chapter 1. All right, so Daniel chapter 1, here we go. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, so that's our timestamp, come hath Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to Jerusalem, and layeth siege against it. So this is the Babylonian captivity of the house of Judah. Verse 2, and the Lord giveth into his hand Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and some of the vessels of the house of God, and he bringeth them into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, lowercase g, and the vessels he has brought into the treasure house of his God. So the land of Shinar, Babylon or Babylonia is in the land of Shinar. In fact, often Babylon and Shinar are actually used interchangeably, for both meaning Babylon. Verse 3. And the king saith to Ashpenaz, master of his eunuchs, to bring in out of the sons of Israel, even of the royal seed and of the chiefs. So before we continue, so Ashpenaz is being told by Nebuchadnezzar to bring in certain sons of Israel. So some of the Israelites that were brought captive, he wants Ashpenaz to pick out certain of the males from Israel. And it'll describe what type of males he's looking for. Now it says to bring them in. Bring them in what we don't know. But these males that we are going to read about, of which Daniel will be one of them, were brought in to live in certain specific quarters. All right, so verse 4. All right, so bring in lads in whom there is no blemish. So in other words, they don't have like physical handicaps. For example, and of good appearance. So that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, good looking, but it could. But that they're symmetrical, they're strong and healthy looking. And skillful in all wisdom. So in other words, they're smart. They seem to be wise. And possessing knowledge. They're knowledgeable. They probably like learning, all right? And teaching thought. They're logical. And who have ability to stand in the palace of the king. All right, so they have wisdom and they're logical and they are calm. They can stand in the palace of the king. They're not going to totally freak out. And to teach them, so they're supposed to teach these young lads the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Now the Chaldeans originally were a separate people from the Babylonians, but the Babylonians absorbed them into Babylon and into Babylon culture. So Chaldean and Babylon and Chaldea and Babylon are often also used interchangeably. But when it's talking about the literature and the language of the Chaldeans, this is talking about the wise ones of Babylon. These Chaldeans were the ones who had the wisdom. These were the ones who practiced witchcraft and divinations such as astrology, where we get our modern day horoscopes. They were practicing things like that. So these Chaldeans, though, were considered the wise people of the land whom the king and others would go to for advice or help or manipulation of spirit forces. Verse 5. So anyways, just before we go to verse 5, so these lads, of which Daniel is one of them, was chosen to be taught the mystic arts of the Chaldeans, but they were also going to be taught the literature, the language, and the knowledge. They were going to be schooled, you could say, in the Babylonian schools, but they were also being schooled in the art and the esoteric arts of Mystery Babylon, or as Young's literal translation will put it elsewhere, secret Babylon. And these secret Babylonian arts were carried through and taught through the Chaldeans. Verse 5. And the king doth appoint for them, these lads, a rate day by day of the king's portion of food and of the wine of his drinking, so as to nourish them 3 years, and that at the end thereof they may stand before the king. So for 3 years they're being heavily schooled, and they're being nourished with the same food and drink that the king himself is nourished with. All right? There could be a problem with that, though. What kind of food and drink do you think Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan king, was partaking of? He would be partaking of unclean meats that were Levitically unclean under the Old Covenant. He would be partaking of meats sacrificed to idols, sacrificed to his, lowercase g, God, such as when he took the vessels from the house of the one true God and put them into the house of his false God. He's also going to be eating food dedicated unto his false God. All right, and then we'll get back into that in a little bit. But first, let's go to verse 6. And there are among them out of the sons of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the chief of the eunuchs setteth names on them. So he's going to give them Babylonian names. And he setteth on Daniel, Belteshazzar, and on Hananiah, Shadrach, and on Mishael, Meshach, and on Azariah, Abednego. So they are being given Babylonian names. Verse 8, so Daniel's Babylonian name is Belteshazzar, but we still see him almost exclusively referred to as Daniel here in the book of Daniel, which is helpful. Verse 8, and Daniel purposeth in his heart that he will not pollute himself with the king's portion of food, and with the wine of his drinking, and he seeketh of the chief of the eunuchs, that he may not pollute himself. Here's Daniel, and he's supposed to be educated in the secret esoteric arts of Mystery Babylon, and he's standing for the one true God. So his first stand is, I'm not going to eat this food that the king eats. This food would pollute me. How would it pollute him? It would pollute him ceremonially, religiously, spiritually. It would pollute him in the eyes of others as well. Because as a man or child of God, Daniel wanted to stay pure for the Lord, and he wanted to do what was right. So even though the king himself wanted him to eat specific things, he knew that that's not the specific things mentioned that he could eat that are Levitically ceremonial clean, and that he's not supposed to eat these things that have been dedicated to these false gods. So Daniel is choosing not to pollute himself with the king's food. Verse 9, and God giveth Daniel for kindness and for mercies before the chief of the eunuchs. You see, when you follow the one true God, including if the laws of the land actually enact actions that are against the word of the Lord of God, but you follow the Lord anyways, or you follow the Lord anyways going against social peer pressure, or against what maybe unsaved or baby Christian family members believe, etc. But when you stay true to the one true God, and he sees that your heart is for him, and that you do desire to do what's right, and you are doing what's right, God honors you. So how is he honoring Daniel in this instance? Verse 9 says that God gave Daniel kindness and mercies before the chief of the eunuchs. So continuing on with verse 10, and the chief of the eunuchs saith to Daniel, I am fearing my lord the king, who hath appointed your food and your drink. For why doth he see your faces sadder than those of the lads which are of your circle? then ye have made my head indebted to the king. So he's saying, well, I'm afraid to change out your food to be different than that of the king's. Because what if you become weak and sad and pitiful looking? I'm going to be in trouble for that. All right, verse 11. And Daniel saith unto Meltzar, whom is the chief of the eunuchs, appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, try, I pray thee. Now, try here means basically it's a test. It's a trial, a test. Try, I pray thee, thy servants 10 days, and they give to us of the vegetables, and we eat, and water, and we drink. And our appearance is seen before thee, and the appearance of the lads who are eating of the king's portion of food. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So Daniel's like, give us vegetables and water for 10 days. And then in 10 days, compare us to the others who are partaking of the king's food, and then judge for yourself. That sounds like a good idea to me. So verse 14, and he hearkened to them. So the eunuch is like, okay. And he hearkened to them to this word, and trieth them 10 days. So he tested them 10 days, as Daniel suggested. Verse 15, and at the end of 10 days, their appearance hath appeared better and fatter in flesh than any of the lads who are eating of the king's portion of food. They had more clarity of mind. They had happier attitudes or countenances about them. Fatter of flesh means that their flesh was filling out in a healthy way. They physically looked noticeably healthier than the other lads who were partaking of the king's table. Verse 16, and the Meltzar is taking away their portion of food and the wine of their drink, and is giving to them vegetables. So Meltzar the eunuch is like, well, this is working. Yeah, you can keep doing vegetables and water if that's what you want. Sounds good to me. Verse 17, and to these 4 lads God hath given to them knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. And Daniel hath given instruction about every kind of vision and dreams. So Nebuchadnezzar's meaning for these 4 lads, as well as the other lads from Judah, to learn the mystery Babylonian arts from the Chaldeans. But God, instead, is giving this wisdom and knowledge of godly knowledge unto Daniel and the 3 lads with him. And notice that Daniel's being specifically given instruction about every kind of vision and dreams. That is Daniel's main gift, of course also along with prophecy. The two go hand in hand, and we will see this gift played out over and over again as we continue going through the book of Daniel. Meanwhile, continuing on with verse 18, and at the end of the days that the king had said to bring them in, so this is at the end of the 3 years, all right, bring them in doth the chief of the eunuchs before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king speaketh unto them, and there hath none been found among them all like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they stand before the king. Why were they so different? Ultimately, they stood out and were so different because they were godly. So, they followed the Levitical clean eating laws as under the Torah, under the Old Covenant, which they were under. And they honored God by not eating meat sacrificed unto idols. And God blessed them by giving them wisdom and instruction from on high, not from devils and demons and man's wisdom. All right, but they're noticeably wiser and healthier. So Nebuchadnezzar immediately sees them standing out from the others. All right, verse 20. And in any matter of wisdom and understanding that the king hath sought of them, these 4, he findeth them 10 hands above all the scribes, the enchanters who are in all of his kingdom. So when he would consult with them for wisdom and what they suggested as discretion on certain matters and decisions, he found them so much more wiser and smarter than all of these enchanters, these scribes and these enchanters and these witchcraft type people that are throughout the whole kingdom of Babylon. Verse 21, And Daniel is unto the first year of Cyrus the king. Now, what does that mean? That doesn't mean that that was how long he lived. That doesn't mean that that was just how long he was in captivity, because in Daniel chapter 10, it begins with during the third year of Cyrus the king. So what does verse 21 mean? And Daniel is unto the first year of Cyrus the king. That's how long Daniel lived in those quarters, divided by Nebuchadnezzar. And this concludes our study of Daniel chapter 1. We are off to a great start. I hope this blessed you. I hope that you will follow along with me as we go through the whole book of Daniel. Have a blessed day.